I am going to.
Okay, it's 6:30, so we're going to bring this meeting to order. It's going to be a fun-filled hour or so with Diane and Connie. They've taken all the information that the subcommittees have given them. They've gone through the budget, and they have a packet for each of us that shows what each subcommittee's come up with so far. They've also broken down the budget to show what the cost of each function is. And they're going to actually go through it with us. And this is the last meeting where we're going to be able to just talk in generalities. After this, we're going to get down to specifics and talk about whether we want a police department or not and our going forward. What?
Actually, every service.
Every service.
Every service.
Every service. So we're going to be discussing that in the weeks ahead. But right now, we're going to get the package from Diane.
Okay.
And
same thing, one for everybody.
They will be filling us in and giving us our recommendations on how to go forward.
Our guidance on process. Okay. First item on the agenda. Oh, fine. Thank you.
I can get out of your way.
No, you're good. There's before you get into the packet, let's just quickly, because we'll want to kind of walk you through what each piece is in the packet. We wanted to just do a kind of a quick recap in terms of where we are, progress of the committee to date. Do you need another chair? Yeah. And there's an extra blue packet for Brian. There should be one for everybody.
Yeah, I got it.
Thank you.
Brian? Yeah.
Okay.
You know.
Okay.
No, it's fine. You're good.
Just to recap in terms of progress to date, Brian, we're right at the very beginning of the agenda. Okay. And we wanted just to talk a little bit about the timeline as it was initially presented. We're doing everything we can to help the committee work through the timeline in an accelerated fashion, understanding that there's a kind of a short frame of time here, and everyone's kind of anxious to get to the next step in this process. So we've been doing everything we can to pull together the information that's going to be most helpful to you as you embark on this next step. So just to recap, obviously we had our initial meetings, and we've now had that initial public information meeting. Our team has started doing the research that's necessary for seeker and having an understanding of what's going to be the best process for seeker. The data collection portion, which has been the bulk of the committee's attention for the last few weeks. And I have to commend you. You really have been doing a lot of homework, and I know that we've been pounding on everyone to do yeoman's work in terms of gathering information. At this point, going forward, you're going to be glad that you have that resource available to you, because now we're going to start getting, now that the data collection's been done, and we have a few last-minute pieces that we're going to get to finish out the public works portion of services and the service analysis. But what Connie's been working on is pulling the information together and putting it in a format that's going to be helpful to you as you embark on the next step in the process, which is looking at potential service delivery options, determining what service deliveries you want to continue post-dissolution, and then determining what alternatives there are to the current delivery methods whether those would be the methods that are employed post-dissolution or as an alternative to dissolution. Now's the time to be talking about what are the alternatives in terms of service delivery. So from this point forward, the tough conversations, the tough discussions are going to begin. And that data that you've already collected is going to really be a critical resource to you as you go through that process. So the packets that you have that have been given to you contain a lot of information that is kind of a compilation of all the data that you've collected to date. And it's number 2 in the on the agenda has literally a listing of 6 different pieces of information, and Connie's going to walk you through what those collections of data are and how they're going to be helpful to you.
The very first one in your,
Just one question. We're on the schedule here, we're at the number 4?
We're literally at, no, we're embarking on this, we have jumped to, and we're embarking on this center section here on that first page that is the discussion about service delivery alternatives. So it's more in the number 6 section. We finished number 4. You've been conducting the interviews. You now have an idea of what the current delivery of services looks like. And we're on number 5, basically. We're reviewing the data today, and so we're embarking on number 6.
okay?
Yep.
Okay, the very first thing in your blue notebook is we took the town and the village.
It's not actually the first thing. The very first thing, we want them to skip because we're going to come back to this.
Oh, I'm sorry.
We're going to come back to the post-dissolution analysis guide. We'll come back to that at the end.
Yep.
So
the very first thing after the guide is the town and village of Lyons budget comparison. The village has one budget, and I know you know some of this and some you don't, and the town has 4 separate budgets besides the districts, and for right now, those districts are not relevant for this compilation. So what we did is we took all of the revenues and the expenses by account code, and you'll see, for example, the very first one, real property taxes. You'll see what was in the 2013 Town of Lyons budget and the village budget. And you'll go down through, and it starts out with the revenues. And as you flip through, and then appropriations in municipal accounting is synonymous with expenses. Those are the budget figures that the village and the town put in an expectation that they thought that's what they were going to need to perform the operations of their municipality, and they get that either by taxes, by non-tax revenue, whatever. And I think you have a copy of both the village budget and the town budget. So that goes through all the way through. And then there is water and sewer that is strictly village budget, and it goes all the way through up to page 8 of that budget. And please, if you have any questions, jump in, or you can give us a call, but I think it's pretty straightforward. The next piece in there is the subcommittee function responsibility, and this is from the budget documents. We wanted to show all of the different subcommittees, and it's the top of it says subcommittee function responsibilities, and it's after page 8 of your budget comparison.
it's the next piece. The way these packets are set up, and it'll make more sense in a few minutes, but the way the packets are set up is there's 3 different documents at the beginning that are kind of general purpose. They relate to all the subcommittees. This first piece that Connie just was talking about literally is taking a look at the budgets of the village and the town and walking through the budget from T to green, from the first account code to the last account code, and identifying those expenses and revenue, but the expenses of the town and the village, and lining up those expenses side by side so that you get a chance to see what is being expended throughout the budget. So that's one way of looking at this financial information. We're going to try and give you several ways of looking at the financial information. So this is just one way. So, sorry, just wanted to interject that.
That's all right, jump in anytime. And then the next, after that budget comparison, is a 2-page subcommittee function responsibilities. This is, again, is from the budget document. We wanted to show you by subcommittee, by function, who has expenditures so that you're able to take a look to be sure that you have covered everything. For example, and we'll just look, the very first one is public safety, police department. You see 2 X's under village, meaning obviously that the village is the only one that has the police enforcement. The same with the fire department, and then ambulance, the checks are under the town because the town manages that.
Basically, who's responsible for providing what service-related function?
And it goes all the way down, just a quick snapshot, simple chart that will show you whether town or village, or in many cases both. You'll see under court, both. There's checks under both because there's a village court and a town court. Okay, and that's the next 2 pages. And then after that, we thought it would be good, we pulled on the village budget, the debt service. And in addition to the debt service, we thought it would be helpful to see what is entailed in that. For example, the street sweeper. There's the debt amount, the year that it's going to be paid off, the annual payment, and then the function it's going to fall under. So the street sweeper is going to be done in 2027, and it's a function of public works, obviously. So that goes down for the general fund, and then for also water, and on the next page, sewer, to identify all of the debt service that the village currently right now is paying on a yearly basis. Yes, ma'am?
It's more than the street sweeper. There's the backhoe.
Okay, there's a,
other,
oh, good,
other
thank you,
items,
Mayor.
That
so-
264?
Right. the
Okay, so it's,
Got a question.
it's street,
Yeah.
it's street equipment?
It's street
Okay,
equipment. yeah.
okay,
Okay,
thank you.
good.
And any time that you see something that's omitted, please give me a holler and make sure that we address it so that we have as much information as possible.
So,
Okay.
I got a question.
Yes,
You said it's street equipment, Mayor?
Yeah.
So you're talking payloader, backhoe?
Yes.
Okay.
okay? Okay, now we're at the very first tab. And from here on, the rest of this is by function, so, yes.
Should we ask questions now about these?
Oh, absolutely.
Sure.
You're back on the debt service?
Yeah,
Okay.
Erie Canal Corridor, is that money that we're gonna get reimbursed, or is that?
No, that's money several years ago, maybe. I'm not sure if it says here when it was taken out.
It-
Yeah.
There was money for doing work along the canal that it was a low-interest loan. It, what was, you put in the steps and,
So associated with an improvement project?
yeah, it was a canal improvement.
That was
project.
bonded then,
Yes.
which is why
Yes.
it's debt
Yeah, I
service.
see it's bonded. And also the paving was bonded?
Yes, that was a couple years ago that we did, I believe, Broad Street and a couple other streets in the village.
That canal corridor was that money they had allocated for employment. If you hired so many people, you would get X amount of dollars. It was like, the village, I think, assumed, what, $250,000 if other for other businesses, and I think we gave some to DeLoca and one other business.
Yeah,
And
DeLoca
then, once
pays
we did that,
theirs.
then there was money allocated that we could use for the corridor.
It's almost like
So,
economic
so
development.
that,
Yeah.
now, I was under the impression that the fire trucks, the debt amount, it's very confusing here because the village bond, did you bond the fire truck? Because they told us that the fire trucks were paid with the insurance money,
With the insurance money.
the 2% money. They get 2% money.
These go way back to, is there a budget on the back here? Because it gives the date of,
No, but I have,
There was 2
And we
fire
should have a
trucks
copy, we'll
bought
have a copy.
it
under my
goes back,
administration.
way back.
So, 10 years ago.
10 years ago.
I think the E1, the ladder truck and one pumper were bought. The E1 pumper is probably the 91,000.
Okay.
So, you paid 20-year bond for the fire trucks?
Right. Hang on a second, and I'll tell you exactly.
Sorry, it's all marked up. It was my working document.
First fire truck was in 1996 at 2.5%. It'll be paid off in 2016.
Yes, that's 20
And
years.
there's, the second fire truck was bonded in 2002 at 2.5%. And that'll be paid off in 2022.
What do they figure the life expectancy of a fire truck is, 20 years?
In Lyons or anywhere?
Yeah, here.
Depends how much it's used and how the
Yeah.
maintenance is done.
Most of the trucks that are here are well kept, and then they get resold.
Oh, okay. After
That 1996 truck, that first fire truck one, is probably not even, that loan is probably not even on, I might be wrong, not even on that fire truck. That fire
Yeah.
truck has been sold, another one's been bought, and then that, whatever money was sold, went towards the next one, and that money was left to
Oh, I
be
see.
paid.
Okay.
Correct? I'm
Oh,
assuming that first one is, truck is gone.
So
I
there's
could be
been-
wrong.
So there's been a rotation plan.
Yeah,
Yes,
there
there's a
has.
rotation.
There has.
oh, okay.
I can,
I could be totally
Yeah.
wrong, but if I remember correctly, I think that's that first truck.
there'll be a time to go over
And the E1 truck is the ladder truck.
Diane, on the paving, the 51,600, is
Okay.
that the current debt as of today?
That's according to the
hear
information
the
that we
question.
have. He asked about on the paving, if that's the current debt amount. That's what was in, according to the current
The
budget.
debt amount, that debt amount figure is what the balance is going to be at the end of this fiscal year, which will be May. So after those principals are made, the principal payment and interest are paid, that's going to be the debt amount that's left. That's correct, is that, Mayor? That's what
We've
was,
got to- I think that's the amount we owe this year, or it's beginning of the year, and then once we pay it,
is
it'll
it on
reduce.
your budget sheet?
Well, if it says
Yeah, right there in front of it.
2014.
Yeah, it's a little confusing because it says
That'd
it's
be-
complete in 2014, but
Right.
the annual payment's 17, where the debt amount says 51, so I can see where it's
So
confusing.
that's 3
Yeah,
years.
that's
Yeah.
3 years it'll
So-
be finished, yeah.
Yeah,
So it's gonna be 2015 then?
that's what it looks like, but they're looking at the paving, which is
Oh,
right
the
here.
paving.
The 51.6 says it's supposed to be done in 2014, but the annual payment's 17.
Is that the one that is being transferred over to a bond?
No,
No, okay.
Okay.
Okay, so that 2014 is not accurate?
I'm not sure
Okay.
without looking
All
at,
right, but-
without looking at it.
Okay.
It was 5 years, so that was 2009 we took it out, so from 5 years. the,
That would make sense,
paving.
2015.
Yeah.
Okay.
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 Any other questions on the debt service?
Thank you.
I'll leave this out in case we need
So those first three pieces have to do generally with all the different function areas that equate to the subcommittees that were created to focus on specific functions. The rest of the packet has each of the focus areas or each of the subcommittee areas separated by a tab. So we were trying to help you organize the information so it's ready to put right into the notebooks that you've already started. So it's already hole punched and separated with tabs. The very first section being the focus on public safety. And so there's two pieces of information in each of the tab sections. And the first piece of information is the fiscal data collected by function. And so in the very first tab, the focus is public safety. So here's all of the budget data, only instead of looking at it by account code, which is what that first budget piece did, this collects all the information from all the different areas of the budget, both first the village budget and then the town budgets, because there's more than one budget in the town. But it collects the information together so that you can focus on it entirely as a service, as a function. So all the public safety expenses have been gathered together, listed first as a village function, and then as the town public safety functions. So we put it together so that each subcommittee would have their data collected in one summary, and you'd be able to look at the fiscal piece, with you won't have to look through a budget and find data that's scattered throughout a budget. It's now been pulled all together and literally totaled for you with that focus area in mind.
And then, as you asked for, the second two columns talk about the revenue. When we could pinpoint it to a function, then we did. And so any of the revenue, you'll see police, law enforcement, $1,200, workman's compensation, $17,004, and then the fire department, and it goes down through any revenue that is picked up for that particular department.
So we thought it was important that each of you have all of the summary data for each of the subcommittees, even though over the next couple of weeks, you're going to be focused obviously on your subcommittee's focus area. You're going to be working with your own subcommittee and really scrutinizing this data and coming up with your evaluation of services and the delivery of services and what your projected delivery of services will be in terms of the recommendation to the whole committee, so that the whole committee can make a decision about what it wants to recommend to the community. Does that make sense?
And that second piece, moving on public safety, and each one of the functions has this under the same tab, service discussion points by function. And this is from the data that you have given Diana and I on the activities. And it starts out with public safety, and I listed, as I had them, any of the activities that from your interviews you've identified, and then those that you had marked were critical. So you'll see as we go down through, this particular first one is public safety, but you notice each tab is each separate. And I have gone through and put those as best I can. I think the only one that's not on here is the Public Works is not totally completed, but what we did was we took that first go-around sheet before you went back for more data, and as best we could, filled in some of those activities. You'll see some blank holes and some more data that's going to be needed to fill in for you to take it to the next step, which Diana will talk about. I just want to bring up one thing. As we talked about the revenue by function, when you get to admin, and admin is after the court, flipping through the sheets, because the administrative subcommittee is responsible for finance.
It's the second to last section.
What
right
we
before the
did
last
is
tab.
there was
Right before the last tab.
right before.
Sorry, folks. It's easier for me to flip because I have it already in my notebook. So
What you'll see is any of the revenue that could not be identified to one particular function. I put under each of the general fund, the undistributed revenues, for example, real property taxes. We couldn't take that and pinpoint it to any one function. So we listed them all so you could take a look and see what the revenues look like for both the town and village. And we did it both by revenue by function as best we could, but in this case it's just all the rest of it, interest and earnings, state sharing, per capita, anything that we couldn't take out and pinpoint to a particular function. Just so you'd have that, excuse me, as a point of interest. If you have any questions on it, you're certainly welcome. After you digest it, I know it's a tremendous amount of information.
yeah.
And then water and sewer is on the last sheet, last tab.
So as you look through this material, that first within each tab section, so by function, first there's the summary data that was taken from the budget that is collected. So all the data for that function is collected in one spot for you. Then the second piece is the data that you collected from department heads from those interviews that you conducted. And what we've done is we've tried to create for you a summary list of all the services that were identified from those interviews. And one of the questions on the forum about, criticality of the service, is it considered a critical service? And we, where that information was present, we added it to that chart for you. There's obviously, some services where there really is no response or criticality is not marked, and you may feel as though that's a discussion piece, whether or not that service is a critical service. I mean, some things are obvious, like payroll. You cannot, you can't really administer a local government without that function being performed in some way. So that may or may not have been marked as but it was just one example. If it wasn't marked as a critical function, we didn't make any assumptions. We projected no opinions. We simply summarized for you the data that you collected, and are trying to put it back in a format that is helpful to you as you work through the list of services. And the intention here, our job, is to help you with process. We want to make sure that you have the information that you need to work through these critical issues and make good decisions. We're not making recommendations. We're not projecting, anything in terms of opinion or, making recommendations in terms of direction. We simply, and we're not making any assumptions. We're simply giving back to you in a form that we think it will support the process, the information in a way that will help you ask the critical questions. So to that end, we created for you the very first page in this packet. The cover page was what we call the Post-Dissolution Service Options Analysis Guide. Is this a good time to talk about that?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay.
Based on this.
Yeah. So what that analysis guide really will do is kind of help you focus on this information and take it to the next level, which is really your action item as a subcommittee member now, to utilize this guide. The very first step is you're going to want to review all the materials within your responsibility area as a subcommittee member. You want to meet with your subcommittee members, and together you're going to want to work through all the tough discussions that are going to come now. What services are going to be delivered going forward? Based on the criticality and based on your thought process, and working through these issues with the subcommittees, with your subcommittee. So what services will be delivered? What method will be used to deliver those services? Are they going to be outsourced? Are you going to utilize staff? What kind of staffing is it going to take to deliver those services? So you're going to want to determine not just staffing as a resource, but what other resources are required. What kind of credentials are required? And you may find it necessary to conduct additional interviews. We've really tried to help you, gather as much preliminary data as necessary. But you may find that you still need to pick the brains of your, so to speak, of your department heads, and maybe bounce ideas off of them. This is the working subcommittee process time, where brainstorming and really critical discussion needs to take place. We want to be available to you as you go through this process on a subcommittee level, and we certainly want you to feel free to contact us, and we will sit down and work through with you any process piece that we can help with. And in order to kind of kick off the process, we created this analysis guide. So let me just kind of walk you through what this analysis guide is suggesting. On the left, on the analysis guide, are the action items that we're recommending to you. And on the right are related questions that we think as a subcommittee you need to take into consideration, or you want to be asking each other. So the very first is discuss and reach the very first action item is you're going to want to discuss and reach among your subcommittee members a consensus regarding what services within your focus area should or should not be provided going forward. And make sure as you look in your budget information and in the summary of the services that your department heads provided, that based on the budget data, if it was a subcontracted or a contractual service, we really didn't have a lot of data. But you shouldn't discount the discussion. You should still have the discussion about the service and how it might be delivered going forward. So we wanted that's why there's a note there. Be sure to include contractual services, those services not provided by staff. They may have been left off the list when the department head interviewed with you. Because it was, if it's an outsource, they might not have thought about it in terms of what their staff is doing on a day-to-day basis.
I see on the contractual expenses, some of the larger numbers. I mean, can we break that down, what they're for?
Yeah, on a subcommittee level, we absolutely want to, whatever additional research we need to do so that you have the information that you need. And, Denise and Mayor could be a tremendous resource there.
They actually have a list of all of the .4s, which are contractual service for the village. Is that, I'm not sure if that's part of the budget. I know we had a copy.
Was it attached
I'm
to...
not-
But you have it. I know you have it
I
available.
know I gave everybody a budget. I'm not sure if it was
we'll
included
check.
with it.
We'll check and see if it was included, and then we can make sure that everybody gets an extra copy of that, because that would be helpful information.
Yeah.
I did
Be
not
glad
have, we
to.
didn't have anything on the town side. I think I had called Diane and she said it was not broken out by explanation. I know on the village side it was, so maybe if you had any questions on the budget on the town side, either Brian or Diane might be able to help you on that
An
piece.
extra sheet, you said.
Would be in the back of, put down.
Okay. So the related questions on the right side of that chart. Is the service considered critical? Who receives the service? Is the service cost justified? These are not meant to be, there's nothing being suggested with the questions. We're just trying to help you formulate discussion points. We're trying to get you into the mindset of thinking in terms of, bottom up. What does it take to deliver the services? And frankly, if somebody asks, what's your reasoning for keeping the service? We want you to have thought about it so that you have an answer. That's really what we want to prepare you for going forward. Having given consideration to a topic so that you, if asked, can share the rationale behind the recommendation that you ultimately make to the committee. So the question is, service cost justified? If you're going to kind of analyze a service based on cost to an interpreted value that you get from the provision of that service. And keep in mind, sometimes there are regulatory mandates that dictate that a service be provided. So that may be a question as well. Number two, determine how services will be delivered, taking into consideration the manpower that's needed. And here we're kind of stressing that the discussions need to focus on FTEs, full-time equivalents. So we're really not talking about people here and individuals who hold positions, but rather talking about the manpower or the position that might be needed to fulfill a service delivery. That will certainly make it a much more objective discussion in terms of how a service is delivered. So what are the manpowers that are needed in terms of FTEs? What are the assets that are needed? Here's where the discussion about equipment can come into play. If there is any duplication of equipment on both the town and the village side. And what is the condition of the asset? That's actually a great question. So what are skill sets that are needed by employees providing that service? And the last consideration point, cross-utilization of manpower. Keep in mind that staff could be used in more than one function area depending upon their skill sets. In other words, you have somebody who's used a portion of their time doing one function, a portion of their time doing another function, and that does happen, across several different services. So keep in mind that elimination of a service in one area can have an impact that you didn't think of in another service area. So just keep in mind, typically it's within the subcommittee function focus, but just keep in mind that that may be a possibility to discuss and consider. And then number 3, develop finally a list of the services to be delivered within that function area, including what FTEs would be utilized to deliver the service. So basically, what is your formulation? When you're done going through these discussion points, what is your formulation? What is your recommendation going to be to the full committee for consideration and for vote in terms of what the committee's final plan is going to look like? This last piece here, determine who pays for the service. You might want to start thinking at this point in terms of there's a big difference between the way villages tend to operate. Budgets tend to be all-inclusive. It's kind of the all-inclusive menu item versus the a la carte menu. Towns very often have lots of different district expenses. So post-dissolution, in an environment where you have different people receiving different services, it generally requires formation of a district so that just the benefiting users receiving a service pay for that service. So that's one of the last considerations when you start looking at what services might look like. If you're talking about restricting service to a certain geography or to certain benefiting users, it may require a district formation. That's something to take into consideration. Who's receiving the service? And if it's a limited group, then it may require a district formation. And generally it means the cost for that service, it requires that the cost for the service be contained within that group of benefiting users. So you'll see all the related questions that are listed here on the right, and things to consider. And at the bottom of that sheet, definitions of what FTE refers to, a full-time equivalent, and it kind of explains that in a little more detail. And cross-utilization, again, just if an employee is utilized in more than one area, more than one service delivery, then that's something to take into consideration. So this is our guide for the subcommittees going forward. Again, we want to make sure that you know that we're accessible to you, but this is where the tough discussions are going to begin, and we just want you to be well armed with a lot of information and a lot of considerations, so that you can work through those issues. We're very focused on process here, but you guys have the tough job of actually talking about the services themselves and what you think things should look like post-dissolution. So the very last step after you've gone through this process and you feel like you've got your recommendations ready to discuss with the committee, at that point, the last step on your agenda, the last step is to contact Sergey and tell Sergey that you're ready to discuss your function, your subcommittee's recommendations with the full committee. And we use the word present. We're not suggesting it be a formal presentation, but rather just a discussion where you're ready to present your recommendations and answer questions so that the full committee
Should be something in writing, though. Can be handed out so that everybody can see what the final recommendations are.
That would absolutely be beneficial to everyone, especially if they have a chance to review it in advance of the meeting, which would make it move a little faster. Right. If everybody has a chance to kind of form their opinions or form their questions, prior to that discussion. So.
But all these numbers are the numbers that came from each department.
The budget.
Yeah, that first general, which is, I think you're looking at the general budget, those are budget figures for the budget year, the current budget year that where, that allowed us to do that comparison between the two and draw the information together so you know what the expenditures look like right now. Present day services. That's the starting point, if you will.
One thing, Jim has to leave for his.
Oh, blame it on me.
Well, no, so I just want, we discussed earlier that it might be good to have Bob Archangelis, the fire chief, come and talk to the committee about the fire department. And to give us an idea of why he needs the manpower he does or whatever. And so we have an understanding. I was wondering, is someone from public, from the, can you contact him, or Dick, can you contact Bob? And
Actually, I sent an email to Bob and Chuck Witt asking them, and I think I copied the Public Safety Committee in, asking them to please provide a dissertation outlining their needs and use of functions within the department. I haven't received any feedback on that yet.
Could you ask him if he could come next Thursday? I'd like to have just a meeting. If he can come, I'd like to have a meeting. You don't have to come. It would just be for our general knowledge to find out about the fire department. Everybody can go through the packets. We can discuss the packets. If there are questions, we can get the questions to you so that for the following week, you know what our questions are, and maybe take care of them before the meeting. But next week, I don't think you really need to be here.
Okay. That number 4 on the agenda, which is probably one of the toughest pieces that we have to talk about tonight.
Yeah, well, I didn't say we're going to adjourn. Jim said he had to leave by 7:30.
Yeah.
He had to be someplace at 7:30, so.
John's got to drive
And I
me.
gotta drive him.
She's got to show us where to go.
Oh, okay.
Time-wise, are we okay? Do we have a couple minutes before you got to go?
Oh, no, oh, sure. Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
all
No,
right. Okay, so
I'm just shooting for 7:30, that's all.
one of the things that we thought it was important to talk to you about tonight, because it's actually going to be somewhat of a framework for some of your discussions as you meet as subcommittees for your next few meetings. And that is a discussion, number 4 on the agenda, discussion or decision of this committee, the full committee, on assumptions for the next steps. And I just want to explain that those are not assumptions that would necessarily drive what the recommendations of the committee are going to be in the final report that's created, but rather assumptions that will help form a baseline or a working number for the discussions over the next few weeks about services. And that is, what compensation of staff might look like, because you're now going to be embarking on discussion about how many FTEs it's going to take to fulfill a function. And as you discuss that cost versus value received by the public, as if you're having the very basic discussions about, is this a critical service? And if it hasn't been determined in advance, in some ways, some services may be very obvious in terms of their criticality. But if it comes down to a discussion about what cost is to value received for that service, actually nailing down the cost is going to involve some forecasting about what does it take to compensate employees to perform that service. So that being the case, it might be a good idea for the committee to establish assumptions going forward. And again, these are not assumptions as in recommendations to the town post-dissolution, but rather what numbers are we going to use as we perform calculations, in general calculations and discussions over the next couple of weeks. And then once the recommendations have been formalized by the committee, our job is going to be to actually do the math and present to the committee what the fiscal implication of those recommendations will be. The net result of this change in service delivery is going to result in this kind of savings or this kind of cost, financial impact. So in order for us to be able to do that math, we have to know what is an FTE going to cost. So in order to get to that point, we need marching orders from this committee, and frankly, all of you need marching orders from the committee in order to be able to function as subcommittee members. And the marching orders are what baseline number are we going to use for compensation of staff, and what baseline are we going to use for estimating employee benefits, cost of employee benefits going forward.
Now, one thing that we discussed is that we can go into executive session whenever we start talking about these items, if you feel more secure discussing it in private so that your name isn't put on something that gets put out in the rumor mill on the community. So if you want, when we start talking about number of people and compensation, if you want to go to executive session, it's not a problem, just ask. If you don't feel like talking in front of the camera and whatever. Because it's been brought to my attention by some people that they don't feel comfortable discussing those things. So I would just rather let you know now in advance that if you want to go to executive session at any time, feel free to ask and we'll do it.
Can I just make a note, Sergey, in regards to executive session? Because this is not a public body that makes, not a formal public body that executes a budget and responds to the public like a governing board does. Because you're not a governing board, you're really not subject to open meeting laws. And so for that reason, the reason I bring it up is because you're referring to kind of a sequestered discussion as being executive session. Somebody might say to you, well, if you're making unless it follows this criteria, executive session is not justified. The fact of the matter is, because you're not a public governing body, you're not subject to open meeting laws. So, it's just a private discussion. It's really, you don't have to go through this formal statement of executive session. I just want to say that this committee has, at the request of the village, been very open in its discussions and, making sure that the public has access to this information. I think that it's prudent to recognize that it's in the public's interest, obviously, to be involved in this, and the committee has sought ways to support that. But I think the fact that you've recognized that if it's uncomfortable and the progress of the committee is thwarted by the public nature, then I understand the need and recognize the need. But I think it was just important to make the distinction. You're not actually subject to open meeting laws. You don't have to make a statement about executive session, and it's really by courtesy that you've made all these meetings public and have been very supportive of public involvement, but it's not required by law. So,
yeah, but bottom line, when the final meeting or final program, everybody's you're going to know. What goes on in executive session is going to come out at the end anyway. Like, okay, if we eliminate this and we can save that much. If we can consolidate this, we can save that much. Maybe here we can't. We got to leave that the way it is. It's all going to come out.
I don't disagree with that. It's completely up to the committee how you want to handle this. It was just the question was raised about whether or not it was appropriate to go into executive session. It's not a
you're right.
It's not a requirement.
The final recommendations that we post or give to the village will have all that information in it.
Yep.
How we get there, we might not feel comfortable talking about.
That's right.
So that's why
yes, that's
we
a
can
good
have a private conversation.
Mm-hmm.
So, do you want me to talk to Bob? Okay. If we can get a meeting next Thursday with him, that would be really good.
6:30.
6:30 at the firehouse, and we'll meet everybody's charged with reading their packets, looking it over, especially your own subcommittee. If there's any questions, bring them. We'll get them sorted out. We'll get them written down. We'll get them to Diane and Connie. And it'll be a short meeting probably, but we should probably meet just to get that information out.
Do you think that this discussion about, these assumptions might take place at that meeting? I mean, if you think so, it might be helpful if we do come. We certainly, again, want to make sure that you're supported as a community and as a committee.
I think what we'll do this time is, we'll just meet, go over everything, see if they have questions, and then they can meet with you anytime, right? Whenever there's a subcommittee that feels they're ready to give their final recommendations.
That's true. That's true.
We'll meet with you anyway. So for this next week, it's going to take a while for everyone to read through this. So if everybody reads through it, I might have a question about public safety that Dick or about any of the other subcommittees. They might be able to answer our questions without you having to be there. So I don't think you really need to be there for the next meeting. I know you'll come if we need you, but you can always watch the film of the meeting.
Late night.
10 o'clock at night, some night when you can't fall asleep, you can start watching it.
You and the news report.
Right. So, yes.
I believe that at some point here we need to speak with our unions. We have an LPA for the Lyons Police Association, and we also have a representative for the Teamsters. In just going back from reading all the literature, that we should at some point invite union representatives to our meeting for discussion. And so I'm not sure where that goes in the process. And the second thing that
Do we have to talk to them?
well, it says it in the recommendations.
At some point, you're going to have to talk to them.
The dissolution process is
Yeah.
subject to mandatory negotiation
Right.
with
Exactly.
collective bargaining units. So if we have two identified collective bargaining units, you're going to have impact negotiations with both those units, no matter what the dissolution.
But our committee would not be doing that. Of
No,
course,
the village has to do it.
but I guess
Yeah, but
that would
it's-
come into the final expenses of the dissolution, so we would need to have that information, I
Exactly.
guess.
When you're at the point where you have your package of what the tax impact is going to be based on all the services, then a piece of that also is what is the cost of dissolution, and part of that is impact negotiation. So that will
Now, who does the actual negotiations?
village.
We
The village will do it with the unions.
Yes.
we do it with the
So we
union.
won't be sitting in on those, but we'll just get the figures from you, or estimates. you
Well, we
should-
already have contracts. I'm not sure where we would negotiate.
Well, you.
Yeah.
Yeah, but the town doesn't have, if anything does go roll over the town doesn't have any unions.
Yeah.
No. That's
So-
where it has to be renegotiated,
That's
and
right.
that's
Either
when you
they're
sit
gonna have
down
them or
with the
not have
unions,
them.
right?
There's a,
Well,
this is
not-
different.
yeah, this is a little different.
It's a twofold process. The village, in anticipation of dissolution, has to impact, by Taylor law, has to negotiate impact
Right.
on the collective bargaining units.
Okay.
The town then, it would be an option based on what the employees, whatever, public employees can organize at any time.
Oh, I know that.
And they may or may not want to organize. The town may or may not be in a position right off the bat where they'd want to come in with an organized unit. They might want to put off the organized unit to some future date. So it's a twofold
Is it a
process.
is it a 2-year contract, 3-year, year by year?
The length of a contract is negotiated.
This is negotiated as well.
Yeah, depending on
Well, what is
2
it
years
now,
right
though?
now.
You know what
Well, we just finished one I believe, for the police association, 2-year.
It's usually a 2-year.
Hmm?
2-year.
In the 2-year for the Teamster.
Do you have any other ones coming up?
No, we just, as I said, just finished the one for the police. It'd probably be approved at the next board
Does
meeting.
Public Works have a union?
They're all in the
Teamsters.
Teamsters.
Yes.
Fire department and the DPW and the water and sewer, and I think Helen
Two civilian
and
clerks.
Yep.
Denise, the 2 positions in the police are all on with the Teamsters.
But then if dissolution goes through, what happens to those contracts? I thought before you had said they were null.
If the village ceases to exist, and then the contracts are with a party that no longer exists. But it's,
There's
how do
a
I
legal
explain this?
requirement to sit down with the unions and have impact negotiations.
I was going to say the contracts are establish how the village is obligated to those union employees.
Right.
So fulfilling its obligation is part of what needs to be negotiated, how the village would fulfill its obligation in light of the dissolution.
Well, one of the
That's
things
what
they
needs to be
discussed
negotiated.
before was what's gonna happen to sick time. If there's sick time left, will it just be gone, will it just disappear, or will the village pay them for sick time, unused sick time, unused vacation time? Those are the type of things you have to discuss, right?
Yeah.
So,
And keeping in
and that
mind,
would be an expense
You
to
have-
the village after a dissolution.
Does the village have caps on that stuff? So many sick days, so many vacation days, you can't accumulate them, can you?
Yes,
The
You can.
contracts have
well, yes.
the
Well,
contracts.
Yeah, it's added to your retirement, so many sick days.
So you don't have, like, a guy can't, in other words, there's comp time, sick time. I don't know if you do comp time. Comp time is where a guy comes in, does 8 hours, and he just takes, he doesn't take the pay. He puts it on his,
Right,
puts it on the
okay,
books.
puts it on the
Right.
books. And so what happens is over the years, the guy will build up 200 or 300 hours of
well,
comp.
we can't, no, they
Okay, I mean,
can't.
you have to have a,
Right, there's a
you have
cap on that.
use it or lose it.
Right,
You have that
Can.
policy.
and then with, like vacation time, it's so much depending on your longevity
Okay.
that you have.
But all of
and
those are
your sick
specified
time.
in each contract.
In each contract, and
Okay.
each contract is different.
Right.
So that would be done between the unions and the village, nothing to do with this committee.
Well, except the final expense,
Take final expense to the
Expense
debt.
will be.
Yeah,
village.
it'd have to
and
be
that has to be
determined.
in the final
You're right,
recommendation to the
yes.
village.
Yes.
So,
I guess the best way to look at it is that your contract specifies what the employee can have as a bank. And the bank, savings account bank, whatever, in the form of time, may be designated as vacation, may be designated as sick time, may be designated as comp time, as you were alluding to. And there is some caps on that. But the village is gonna have to negotiate what they're gonna do about these banks. And not necessarily something that would impact on the town,
Right.
but it will impact on the cost of dissolution.
And then I just have to toss in another consideration as well, which is that the village's role is going to be to ensure that services can continue until the point of dissolution. That's, and the complication is that people who have unused sick time, for instance, just as an example, unless it's negotiated with them, they have every incentive to not work a day
Yeah.
between, now and when the village dissolves, and that
Usually
leaves.
after 3 days, you need a doctor's note.
So, well, what that does is it leaves a community with no one to provide the services, and so that literally is potentially crippling. So, it's not just about obligations, but rather, still negotiating those incentives to keep everybody productive until the end of the village. So,
So it might behoove the village to start talking to those people now.
Well, we've already had one meeting with them, and we do hear, well, should we start taking some of our time? We don't want to lose it. See, and we can't say to them, you're not going to lose it there'll be provisions made, or we have no idea of what to tell them. But yet, already, I mean, we have people who are, some days we have only 3-4 people. The rest are taking a long weekend, using a sick day or a personal day or a vacation day, where normally they wouldn't. You know,
Of course, they realize it'll be a year and a half or so before,
Yeah, but-
even if it does dissolve.
They get them every month,
Oh, that's
so it
true.
doesn't
One a
matter. They
month,
might
that's
take 3, but they're gonna
12.
gain 4.
Right.
One of the determinations of
How
this
about
committee
that?
is going to be when would the date of dissolution take place.
Yeah.
And, you know, this really kind of, again, since this is the tip of the iceberg in terms of difficult discussions to come, because you've got employees that are reacting to something, but there's nothing defined to react to at this point. So, you know, it's all part of the dynamic nature of this process. You know, as it unfolds for everyone. So it's going to be a learning process for everyone.
So it'd be my recommendation to have the village start doing those meetings with the unions.
We have nothing to tell them.
So I'll tell them that right now, the village is dissolving.
Well, they know that.
All right, well, so you can go forward with that assumption, so that you can say, we will pay people for their unearned sick time, or vacation time, or whatever. That's the negotiations you have
But
to
will
start.
we? We don't know. Nobody has made that decision.
Well, you have to.
The village has
That's
to
the
make
village
that.
has to do that.
Well, we will. We're not going to let our people just hang out there with nothing.
I know, but if we're gonna try to have this done the first week in July, we're gonna have to have that information within the next month. So,
End of June.
right, so we're gonna need that information, so you can't just put it off. You're gonna have to start negotiations now with the assumption that the village is gonna dissolve and that
That's a lot of money.
doesn't matter.
Well, that's what we need to know, what that money would be.
Okay,
The answer is no.
so,
But you're not subject to open meeting laws or FOIL.
Yeah, the question that I had asked is this: if somebody comes to our window and wants a copy.
oh no, this is our,
No,
just our information.
That's
for-
what I wanted to hear.
Right.
It's not so much they need to be negotiating right now with these unions. They need to figure out what they're anticipating if it does come to a closure. What do they expect out of the village?
Right.
Because there is clauses in their unions, what is going to be allocated to them. But they need to, the village needs to know, okay, what do they expect? You know,
Right.
Like any negotiation process, it typically starts with.
you don't want to
what
commit
are
to
the
them for anything, but
concerns?
you want to know what their expectations are, so we know what kind of expenses will be. So when the safety does their report, they can say, well, we're anticipating $300,000 in unused vacation and sick time that needs to be coming out of the general fund.
But
You know,
we
I'm speaking
also-
hypothetically, but
Right.
we
We-
need to know something.
We need to know, like, for districts too, which we can't do, I don't think, a district for retirees' health insurance.
That's going to be
That's
one of the
something to be
determinations of
determined by
the committee.
the committee.
Of who becomes responsible for, you know, what
Right.
debt or, you know,
Or
expenses or
retiree.
even how services are delivered post-dissolution.
Right.
Those are all tough discussions of the committee.
But there will be, you know what the retirement expenses are now for health insurance.
Well, they haven't been
Yeah.
negotiated, though. have
But-
they?
Well, no, I'm talking about people that have already retired.
Oh, yes.
Right.
Okay, so we can go forward with that.
Well, it would seem that these banks and these obligations are accruals that the village is obligated to, so they would have to put that on their debt the same way
Yep.
they're obligated to these bonds.
There's negotiations.
Yeah, it's, Connie's got a good point.
Everything can be renegotiated.
Yeah,
That's
Connie's got a good point, which is that you wouldn't want to inadvertently undermine the village's ability to negotiate effectively.
Yeah.
So I guess I understand, you know, the mayor's discomfort with, you know, what it is we're discussing. I guess the fair thing to say, though, is every aspect of sense of obligation, of expectation, the typical things that are put on the table in a union process, negotiation process, they need to be ironed out. But they're all negotiable from through this in the context of this process. So what employees have on the books is part of what can be negotiated.
Yeah, it's all negotiable, but whatever the end result of the negotiation is, let's say as an example, the end result of the negotiation is a 2 for 3, or 2 for 4, or whatever. Whatever the end result of the negotiation is going to be, that's going to ensure continuity of services and addressing the obligation, it's going to be a dollar and cent figure that's going to be the same as the $15,000 that's owed on a fire truck. It's an obligation incurred by the village, which is going away and now becomes a debt.
This conversation.
Yeah.
At this point, this is you're right. Whatever ends up being the final figure of what the negotiation is, but that negotiation, everything on the table is negotiable and it's the villages and the union's decision when they come together of what they are willing to give and take. And as you know, negotiations are always give and take.
Well, but that's why I'm bringing this up and clarifying it. It gives credibility to what Sergi is saying, is that we can't make blind recommendations on, say, a debt district unless you know the debt.
I think the recommendation is from a few of us is that it needs to be put forth now
Right.
instead of the last minute, because you're talking
Yeah,
you're talking multiple individuals with a lot of
This
time.
won't be
Say
negotiated in
it's an
3
incremental
days.
kind of process.
Yeah.
Yeah,
They can start
this
discussions.
is May.
You know, and I can
But
say
it's not
this
gonna
without
be-
being self-serving. I realize I'm an employee, but by my agreement, I don't have a bank. If I walked out the door tomorrow, the only thing I have is good memories and maybe a plaque. I don't know. But,
We got high expectations. You're going to get a plaque.
well, you put a little masking tape over the old ones from the former employees. But the other employees, by contract, have these banks, and not just the police department, but the Teamster employees too. And then you have the whole issue with retirees with their banks that came through their collective bargaining agreements when they were employees, and there
No, your
needs to be a
point's-
dollar figure on
Your
this.
point is well taken. There's going to be a financial impact from the result of negotiating those concerns.
Should the bill, I'm sorry.
No. Oh, I was just going to say that, the village itself, the village board has an obligation to negotiate in good faith, but also to represent the interests of the community. So to discuss it in a public forum like this, if it jeopardizes the process, then the mayor's not doing her job. And so I understand, some
Well, we don't want to
hesitation.
discuss it, we just want her to get it taken care
Right.
of.
Yeah.
We're not saying. Nobody said what to do.
No, we really
just want
don't
something
want
to
to
be started.
We just want a little like one of these, Mayor, where you slide it across the table and we pick it up and look and go, oh, that much,
that's
okay.
Should the village be still negotiating stuff like this if down the road, or should they be postponing it?
Well, it's unfortunate. The village has to run as it's
Yeah.
like it's never going to happen.
We have to
They
continue
got to keep on
as is.
continuing.
Well,
That's the unfortunate part.
I mean, you could certainly start your negotiation, but, you still have to come to terms with it.
I was just thinking it's likely to be kind of a meet in the middle situation because, right now the conversations are going to be, what are my concerns? Well, what are you talking about? Because that's typically what they
Oh, yeah,
sound
back
like.
and forth.
So, the back and forth can begin, but, it's not likely to be something that can turn into well-defined numbers and terms
Oh, we need
very
an
quickly.
estimate. Right. I gotta
Yes.
Have a nice day.
Have a nice time.
go. See you next week, 6:30.
Tell Dale hello.
Busy social.
Everybody has birthdays, he had a birthday and now she.
Yeah, well, when the wife has
I got a question. Back to the negotiations. let's say the town takes 2/3 of the workforce. Wouldn't those sick days, those vacation days, retirement, I mean, sooner or later, you're gonna have to talk to the town because we're liable to, you know, one of the options is to absorb some of those sick days, transfer some of them over to the town. So when does that take place?
Well, ultimately, every aspect of post-dissolution services is determined by the town, ultimately. So,
But I'm,
To
to get
answer
a
question.
legit number for a debt district, if the town's willing to absorb a few of these things here, that's gonna reflect her number for the village.
Well, the whole issue of what the town's willing to absorb or isn't absorb is pretty arbitrary on your part. You know, whatever you absorb in the way of banks is gracious.
I think the fortunate thing is,
Gratuitous.
this has to be done by the end of June, but it might take a year to year and a half to have it come to fruition. So in that time frame, after it's been decided what way to go, then the two boards are gonna have to start doing some negotiation.
That's why this
Correct?
committee, absolutely, and that's why this committee at least has to determine some marching orders for us to finish that plan and package. And then by the time dissolution happens, Brian, the town board ultimately is going to be saying, yes to this district, yes to this compensation package, yes, we'll let you carry seniority over, no, we won't, depending on what that board looks like when it's time to make those decisions for the town's first budget as a combined entity. And so the best you can do is come up with your best assumptions. Everything can go with what your assumption is at this point. And otherwise your hands are tied. It's the law. You have to come up with this plan, and it is what it is. So this group has been working very hard, and I think collectively can determine, and then with everything documented, that's going to be able to show this is what the tax impact based on X, Y, and Z, because at that point, that's all the data you have.
Would it be beneficial for the village to, I hate keep on putting work on the village office and people, but say position one has 250 days of sick time, comp time, vacation time. I'm thinking out loud, should we advise the boards to look at it as, okay, they're going to retire tomorrow, what are they getting?
What would you do with that figure, though, John?
Well, it would put a cost figure up to what the village is going to have to either come up with or what the town might have to recoup.
That would be a maximum without negotiation.
Right. Well, the higher's better, correct? At least you're not going to be blindsided with another.
Do you mean for union negotiations?
No, nothing to do with the unions or whatever. Every employee of the municipalities, they got X amount of days put in a bank, like the chief was saying. And if they retired tomorrow, some might go to the retirement, some might go to the health insurance, some might be lost, correct? So if we all knew the if we all knew what the maximum amounts were for individual positions.
Our annual report, where'd you go? Our annual report gives the total of sick time, what we owe to our employees. So
As a total
and that dollar amount is right there, so it really.
Well, then if it's already done, that's fine.
Here's John Doe's bank, and these are his days, and these are
Yeah.
whatever. It spits out on demand.
But we have the grand total, and she has to do that once a year. She has to take every employee and what they're owed and put it on the annual report.
I mean,
So, which is pretty accurate.
You certainly can look at that figure. I guess my question would be, once you determine what that date is going to be, then you do that computation, because you don't really know what they're going to be legally obligated to as far as accruals or, what they're owed if you do the accrual after, like, one a month or whatever. I mean, you can do that
It'd just be the worst case scenario if you did it now.
It'd probably be the best case scenario,
yeah.
because that AUD is going to show as of May 31st, and if you have another year, year and a half, whatever it is that's going to be that end date of dissolution, you're actually gonna owe them more.
Accumulate more.
So, once that date, I don't think that computation is going to be that difficult once that date is
No,
concerned.
no.
The bigger issue is impact negotiations between the village, your attorney, the union, to determine what you're going to owe them based on impact negotiations, and then that accrual piece that is legally what you're going to pay out when that date, when the doors are locked and the village is no longer here.
And that, I know we've talked about
Yes.
it a little bit, that they have reduced the amount of money at the state level where we could
Yes.
apply for
Yes.
funding for paying our employees for
Implementation.
sick time.
Implementation.
Implementation. And it's been reduced to
50,000.
50,000, where before it was you
Was
applied,
It was an unlimited.
The
Well, it was
town
what
and the
you
village
applied.
of,
whatever
yes.
the cost was.
We
it
applied
used
for
to be.
$686,000, and we received, the town and village of Santa Claus, $406,000.
And
And then
now
they have
it's
since
capped at
reduced
50.
it, and now it's capped at 50.
So, but it's the information we need for the final report, so,
Yeah,
you know, whatever we can do to try to get those figures would be appreciated.
yep,
So,
okay.
anything else we brought up? Oh,
I just quickly want to say that the mayor and I sat down for an hour or so with Marty this afternoon. Got some questions out to him. He had some questions for
He's
us.
the water authority.
Yeah, the Water and Sewer
Okay.
Authority for the Water Authority. Yes, we got some information from him, and we gave him some, and we're going to get some more information together. And he did say that he'd be willing to come in and talk to the committee like Sheriff Ertz did down the road when it comes time when we do our presentation stuff. Once we get some more stuff put together, which was good. He was very nice and very professional with us.
Okay.
And I also suggested, in the conversation, it came up about the alternative. Even if dissolution doesn't happen, he has some good ideas
Right.
for
So
alternatives.
he's keeping a very open mind. He's not pushing one way or the other. He's not doing anything. He was just answering some questions that we had, and vice versa. So it was well worth the meeting with him.
All the information we can get will help us in the long run.
So that discussion about assumptions, we can table it for a future meeting, and you'll let us know when it's gonna,
Well, the assumption, we'll be doing that when we meet with you, right? When we're getting our final, when each subcommittee meets with you, they will be making assumptions with you, discussing it with you.
but the reason that these assumptions are important as soon as possible is that the subcommittees, when they're doing those cost to benefit kind of, value judgments about keeping a service
Right.
and how it's delivered, compensation of staff is going to be part of making a judgment about the value of that service or how it's delivered, whether it should be outsourced, whether it should be done internally. Those kinds of considerations are somewhat driven by the cost of, an understanding of what the cost of delivery of the service is. So,
We would
and
hope
then,
that within 2 weeks.
okay,
I hope every subcommittee meets with Diane and Connie within the next 2 weeks, so that 2 weeks from tonight, we can sit down and have a basic discussion about our overall plan.
yeah, minimally, we will need to have those questions, these two questions answered so that we can do the fiscal piece once the recommendations are made. But we thought it would be helpful for the subcommittees to have this baseline to draw some judgments from, or some recommendations from about services. But minimally, we can't do the fiscal analysis piece of the final recommendations until these baselines are established.
So does everybody understand that? Within 2 weeks, the subcommittees are to meet with Diane and Connie, come up with your plan, written plan. discuss recommendation, and also discuss manpower. And then, as a committee, we'll discuss what we think about whether we're gonna have a police department, recommend to keep a police department, paid fire, that's why it's important for Bob to come. So we all have a good overview of what the firemen do, the paid firemen do. Do we wanna keep paid firemen?
Do you want to wait until the recommendation is made? I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. When the recommendation is made by the subcommittee first, and then it's considered by the full committee?
That's why we're hoping to have that done in 2 weeks, so then we can get into that discussion.
Okay.
All right? Anyway, anyone else have anything else to be brought up before the board? Committee? Organization?
I'm getting hungry.